She's Lumen through and through. She was raised by them. She's a soldier.
It's a risk, I get that.
A risk?
Yeah.
She will turn you over to them. Both of us.
Mine! My designs! Circuit blueprint, base code, overtime contingency, Glasgow block, all of it!
Hello to all you wonderful innies and outies out there, and welcome to my deep dive breakdown and review of Severance Season 2, Episode 8. An episode where we find out more about Cobell's roots with Salt's neck, as we also learn just how important she was to everything involving Jane Egan's inventions. Now, while this might have been the shortest episode to date, that didn't stop it from giving us a lot to talk about in today's breakdown. With that said, get your brown paper bags ready because it's time for us to discuss this very peculiar episode of Severance. Spoilers ahead. We open with these very beautiful establishing scenery shots of the water and the landscape of this very small town. I thought it was interesting that we opened this episode with a shot of water because we know that Lumen's logo seems to either be a drop of blood or a drop of water, and if it is the latter, I believe Lumen could have polluted the water with whatever they're manufacturing out of this factory that we learned from this town. More on that point a little bit later. Now, I also couldn't help but to think of the seagulls that we see and hear in this opening shot and feel like we were in the security room that turned into the family visits between Gretchen and Dylan. I wonder if there's any correlation between the two. But now for the first time ever of the show, we are outside of Cure PE and we've entered into Salt's Neck, the place that Harmony couldn't go back to in episode 3. But after Helena undermined her accomplishments with what she's done with Lumen, that provided the spark that she needed to finally go back home. As it's been over 5 episodes since we last saw the character, but we finally get the return of Harmony Cobell, who's here to find what we later find out are the original blueprints and ideas to what appears to be the creation and the origins to everything revolving around the entire Severance program and its protocols. I swear we have more to talk about besides this opening sequence, but I do want to point out and show the appreciation to the little attention to detail moments. For example, the opening score at the start of this episode. I don't know if you all noticed it, but the small moment where the Cure Chosen One plays over the piano, and it reminds us that this is where Harmony's beginnings of Cure's lessons began. Now, as Harmony travels through the town, you notice how the homes and even the cars are old and rusted. Some are even abandoned, and you get the sense that this whole town is lifeless or has had its life changed or its lives taken from them from the aftermath of Lumen. Now, was it me or did you all get a similar sense that the structuring of the homes and the overall look of this town, even the cars, felt very similar to the ones we've seen in Cure PE, which I guess seems to be the aesthetic that Cure goes for, including the weather being cold and wintry like Cure PE as well. Now we see Harmony brushing her teeth and she notices what the subtitles labeled as an addict as he puts this mysterious bottle in a brown paper bag and he inhales it. Now this will be a key talking point later in this breakdown. Now I mentioned it in some of my latest videos of Severance, but I figured that Harmony would see Devon's call at some point in this episode as we see it here and throughout the episode, but as of now Harmony is ignoring it because she has some personal business to take care of. Now here we see some of the locals at the Drippy Pot Cafe as one of them mentions an accident involving Dutch Stevens' boy, but here we see the waiter Hampton giving the man a wrapped up bottle of what is known as ether and he tells him it's on the house. Now we later find out that Hampton is actually a local ether dealer, and for those that aren't too familiar with ether, it's actually a drug and it's also known as a diethyl ether. It's a colorless, flammable liquid with a sweet odor. This drug has an anesthetic and a euphoric effects when inhaled and consumed. It can also cause drowsiness, confusion, hallucinations, nausea, vomiting, seizures, and also comas. Now, as we see, this drug is being used as like recreational purposes in this episode. It is extremely dangerous and it can lead to, as I mentioned earlier, serious health problems, including addiction, seizures, and also death. Now, like any drug, people have their personal reasons why they consume it, but based on what we find out about this town, it seems like this drug is used as a way to escape from the aftermaths of Lumen, but I also have a feeling that, as we'll later talk about, that some of Cure believers actually played a hand in its distribution. Now we watch as Harmony enters the cafe and her presence just changed the whole vibe of the room and clearly isn't welcomed with open arms. As Hampton approaches her table, she basically speaks for him in a way that she hoped that he would greet her after not seeing her for a long time, but again, he isn't happy to see her. She comments on the town being older than she remembered as he comments in a very sarcastic and condescending tone, but also in a very corporate type of a way.
Yeah, well, with the market readjustment from a few years ago and the fluctuating interest rates, there was a retrenchment from some of the core infrastructure investments.
I feel like this was something that he heard from someone that represents Lumen when they left this town, especially when he used the word retrenchment, which is primarily about cutting costs, which can improve reducing spending in various areas, including salaries, operations, and investments, aka Lumen left this place in shambles. Now Harmony needs a favor from him and tells him to meet her at the factory as we see him leave immediately and follows after her. It's interesting knowing that Cobell knows that Lumen still has people that are believers of them that occupy this town, so I wonder if Rose and the other gentlemen were maybe Lumen spies. Again, paying attention to the environment, as he's driving, you notice the Lumen is faded out on this building. Now, I couldn't make it all out, but it looks like it said Cure Egan's Lumen for Terre is a miracle cure for men, or maybe make. Now, Terre is the surname and the name of the Polynesian Cultural Arts Center that offers dance classes. Now, I'm assuming that was once a small business that operated in this town, but again, going back to that word retrenchment, you get a sense early on in the episode that Lumen's factory was what made this town more lively and successful. But once they moved and they got out of what they wanted from this town, it took the town's economic structure with it. It wouldn't surprise me if Lumen goes around to these middle of nowhere places and creates these little villages and builds factories and these little Lumen businesses to pose as a place for people to live and work and to think they're building their hopes and dreams. But eventually, they suck the life out of these places and do experiments or test things out on them, and they leave, and nobody questions what happens because they're in this small town and nobody goes even further to do research or digs to find out what happened. I'm really excited to listen to the official podcast for the show, which is hosted by Adam Scott and Ben Stiller. I love when they talk about like the making of the show and also the actors they have in their roles. But in particularly with this episode, I'm very curious on what parts of the environment were like actually parts of the town and what parts were crafted for the purposes of the show, because the overall look and aesthetic really fit perfectly within the story they're telling here. Now, as he arrives, you notice the Lumen Industries logo on the side of the factory building, which reaffirms Lumen's presence being in this town once upon a time. But again, the question remains, what exactly were they manufacturing? Again, the tension between these two are very obvious, and you can just tell that there's history there as he tells her how messed up it was to ask him to come to this exact location, as I would assume that he once worked at this factory. Now, Harmony needs him to drive her to Sissy's house, but he refuses. She tells him that if they're watching, they'll recognize her car, them being Lumen. Now, Hampton tells her that Sissy still lives by the 9 and still known as a pariah in town. Now, initially, I thought the 9 was in reference to like a street name or near a particular place, but as we'll discuss more in detail later, the 9 is actually being referred to as the 9 principles of cure.
We were once chums. All colleagues lift each other up.
Colleagues. Child fucking labor.
So they definitely have a history, a romantic history between these two characters, and they were the Hellion Mark or the Helena Mark or the Gemma Mark of the town back in the day. But the line that caught my attention is when he mentioned child labor. Now, we don't see many people in this town, but we definitely didn't see any children running around. So I wonder if whatever happened in the factory involved children working there, similar to the idea of the Wintertide Fellowship with Miss Wong, but the difference being that kids were working in a factory versus an office. I would imagine that when Harmony was younger, growing up in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, obviously there was no social media, there were no cell phones, there were probably no one that they can call for help or to call out any of this being wrong, because this was the way of Cure. Now, Harmony recites the story about Cure meeting his first wife at the ether mill, as he mentions if she was hacking up a lung at the time. Now, not much known about Cure's first wife, Imogene, but this being the first bad thing we heard about her, and it sounds to me like there was some medical issues that may had something to do with Cure himself. Was she also an ether user and became an addict to it? Stories left out from Cure's life story from the Lumen employees. Now, as they continue to go back and forth, Harmony mentions smelling the ether on his breath and says that she won't be his punching dummy for his resentments. Again, those of the town, like a Hampton, for example, who used to maybe work at the factory because it was all they knew. But eventually they caught on to Lumen's BS, but they still have regrets of having had anything to do with them and potentially dangerous things that happened during that time when they were working for Lumen. I would imagine that her siding with Lumen and eventually moving out of Sauce Neck seemed to cause this rift between the two characters. She stayed a believer and went wherever Lumen or Egan wanted her to go, but he stayed behind as the town died. Now, he agrees to take Harmony to Sissy's house, but she's taking extra precautions by hiding in the back of his truck under some plastic. As we see, Devin definitely did not listen to Ragabi as she's still calling Harmony, but again, she's not picking up quite yet. Now, as they arrive to Sissy's, we can see that she is 10 toes down, a Cure believer, and Hampton and her do not get along as he tells Harmony to tell her,
"Tell her to drop dead for me."
As Sissy opens the door and isn't happy to see Harmony and her ex-colleague on her property and threatens to call the authorities. Again, going back to Sissy and Lumen being the downfall of this town, Harmony says that Sissy was the one that introduces Thirst to Ether, but Sissy calls her a liar. So I'm wondering if Lumen or Cure was the reason that the townspeople got addicted to Ether, which makes me wonder if that was what they were manufacturing in the factory. Or before Sissy made her full turn into a Cure believer, maybe she wasn't as holy as thou before making her devotion to Cure. Now we watch as Harmony enters her childhood room and we see her getting sentimental over a very vintage furry toy. Now more proof that she grew up here as we see these measurements over the years of her height and had stopped at the age of 12. I bet that's when she left to attend the Myrtle Egan School for Girls. Now as Harmony tries to enter her mother's room, she finds out that it's locked. Now you notice the plaque on the wall. It's actually from Lumen Ether and it says the Quarterly Striver 4th Quarter Year of Vision, which is one of the 9 core principles of Cure. Now you also notice Sissy's full name, which is Celeste Sissy Cobell. Based on what we learn later, it's safe to assume that Sissy was Harmony's aunt who taught her the ways of Cure and also Charlotte's sister. Now Harmony learns that her belongings were sold away as Sissy doesn't get any visitors, but she has gotten calls recently from Mr. Drummond. Now Sissy doesn't answer when asked what he wanted over the phone, as we see Harmony has a nickname of Little Mouse and asks what has Harmony done. Harmony disconnects the phone line and demands the key to her mother's room, but Sissy tells her,
"That room stays shut until all who remember her sit with Cure. You know this."
Now to me this sounds like some Cure mumbo jumbo about the afterlife, but this also could speak to my theory about Cold Harbor. Harmony's mother might not be quote unquote dead, she might be like a Gemma situation where she's under Cure's possession, meaning they put a chip in her head and now she lives as an innie. Now as they have a disagreement about who brought woe into the house, we see Harmony asking Sissy what her mother's last words were.
She said nothing after you pulled the tube from her gullet.
Now Sissy says that it was gratitude and mercy for her to let her mother in her suffering.
If only she had been a believer, perhaps she would have found solace in the 9.
Again, the 9 that she's speaking of is in reference to the 9 core principles that everyone must strive to achieve according to Cure, which is on the screen now. Now again, it's very possible that Charlotte has passed on, she has physically died, but I believe that she speaks of her outie not having been a believer of Cure's teaching, so it could be possible that her innie has. If again, my Cold Harbor theory is to be true, check out my last video to learn more. After this physical and emotional exchange, Sissy talks about the experience of Charlotte's condition as Harmony says leaving for school was the reason she wasn't there to be able to attend to her mother's needs. Now again, if the factory didn't produce or manufacture the ether, I wonder if whatever it was affected the townspeople and speaks to Hampton's comments about Cure's wife's lungs. Did those who worked in the factories or lived near the factories get some type of radiation from it and it caused illnesses, or it got into the town's water? Again, remember the opening shot of this episode was of water. And again, remembering that Lumen's logo could be a symbol of a drip of water. We see Harmony saying that she didn't get a chance to say goodbye to her mother, as Sissy says her studies were way more important and that Mr. Egan, referring to Jane, saw Cure in her. Now within this conversation, we also get our second mention of the Wintertide Fellowship. First time we heard this was back in episode 6 when Mr. Milchick was speaking to Ms. Wong, who was also a part of it as well. As Sissy says that Harmony was a standout at the factory and was the most industrious. We see Sissy rubbing her Cure homemade stone, which leads Harmony upstairs to where she finds another shrine. Now here you notice different articles written about Jane, and also we have this sign talking about balancing life and work. Now, I haven't really went down the rabbit hole of the whole satanic or devilish path of the show and the undertone of its themes, but I know that that's out there. Again, I just haven't went down that path quite yet. But looking at some of this art on the wall, it definitely seems like there's some type of witchcraft or cultish behaviors within the belief of Kier, especially with this image here. Looks like imagery of Scapegoat in the story of Ezreal. Now, we also see the Four Tempers, we have a picture of Kier himself, and behind that picture is a quote that we seen at Cobell's old place, and the saying that we heard from Milchick, which is, "You must cut to heal." As we also have the cards of the 9 principles as Harmony eventually finds the key. Now, inside her mother's room, she feels the weight of the emotions overpowering her. As she looks around the room, she sees a picture of herself as a girl that her mother kept above her bed. As she takes out the breathing tubes that she's been holding on to since whenever the last time she was here, as we watch her connected to the machine and she lays in her mother's bed and she begins breathing in it as I would imagine her mother would as she cries herself to sleep. Now, I could be totally wrong on this, but it sounded like Harmony was humming into the tubes the Kier Chosen One tune. Again, knowing that she's been taught and lived by the ways of Kier, and we've been seeing her slowly this season, and particularly in this episode, she's no longer a believer. Now, backtracking a bit, I couldn't find the logo of Lumen on the machine, but it wouldn't surprise me if Lumen is responsible for actually making this machine as well. Now, as time passes, we get this beautiful shot overlooking the house as we transition into the night. We can hear an argument between Hampton and Sissy in the background as he comes in to get Harmony to leave, but she won't leave without finding what she came for. We find out that Hampton was a big fan of Harmony's mother, Charlotte, because her mother shared a very common hatred over Lumen, and that's all he needed to know about her. To me, that just confirms that Charlotte had nothing to do with Harmony leaving to go to school. She wanted nothing to do with Lumen, and it just sounds like it was forced on her by her auntie, Sissy, which just adds more tension and drama between these two, because you would imagine that Harmony really doesn't like her auntie because she forced this on her and pushed her towards Kier and separated her from her sickly mother. Now, to relieve some of the tension going on in the situation, we see Hampton offering to get high with Harmony, which we see him inhaling the ether as Harmony does as well, and this is the first time she's done this since she was 8 years old, which is crazy. Now, after a few huffs and a couple laughs, we watch them kiss. Now, this sparks Harmony to going outside to the little underground shed as she finds her Myrtle Egan School for Girls yearbook. Now, inside this yearbook, we see a picture of Harmony, who was a valedictorian, and under it, it talks about her outstanding performance. Now, on the very next page, we see her next to a much younger Jane Egan, who presented her with the highest honor of granting her with the Wintertide Fellowship, as we see her here with the statue-headed award. Now, inside the head, Harmony finds what brought her back to Salt's Neck. Now, she heads back outside to tell Hampton to prepare the truck before heading back inside to tell Sissy goodbye. Now, inside, she tells her not to tell Lumen that she was here, but Sissy basically tells her that she's 100% going to be snitching on her, as Harmony reminds her which side she's on by supporting Lumen, who is responsible for destroying this town.
There was no town before the factory. And what about your own employ? Everything that you have, you owe back to the Egans as fealty.
Fealty?
Now, Harmony disagrees and screams and yells as she shows Sissy her stolen work and designs.
Circuit blueprint, base code, overtime contingency, Glasgow block, all of it!
Inside this notebook is a big moment because it reveals that Jane Egan stole her ideas behind everything that involves Severance and all of its protocols as well. So go back to that conversation she was having with Helena back in episode 3, and just to think, they put the creator of the Severance program and everything around Severance and made them a glorified floor manager and didn't give her a seat on the board, which just makes me think, who else may have a bigger stake in Lumen and was thrown on the Severance floor? We obviously know about Helena and her side project. She's an Egan, but she's on the Severance floor, which makes me think about the theory of Irv's importance to Lumen and maybe him having some stakes in the company, or even Bert. Could they have been responsible for Lumen's current status quo? That is a pretty big reveal that Harmony is a straight up genius and knows everything about the chips and everything going on with Severance and the whole program, as Sissy asks her why she never learned about this until now, as Harmony reminds her of Kier's saying, knowledge is for all, aka if you have a good to great idea, the Egans will take it and make it their own. Now, after hearing that, we see Sissy takes it upon herself to try to destroy the proof as Harmony tells her that she hopes she dies one day just as painfully as her mother. As Sissy leaves her with the truth, or at least the truth that she sees it, as she tells her that Charlotte was actually the one that ended her own life. Harmony does not believe her, as Sissy says that she believed that Harmony was just her little flower that she couldn't wait to grow, but she says to her that she's now a weed just as her mother was. Now outside, Hampton warns Harmony of someone from Lumen arriving shortly as they say their goodbyes, and we see Hampton welcomes this Lumen shield as he says,
"Come tame these tempers, assholes."
Now we end this episode with Harmony taking Hampton's truck and headed back to Cure as Devin calls again and Harmony answers this time around as we end this episode with her saying to Mark,
Hello?
Tell me everything.
So it appears that Harmony Cobell has made a turn for the good side, right? We can trust her now because she's no longer drinking the Kool-Aid. That was such a crazy reveal to find out that Harmony was the creator and the person responsible for making Severance. So you would imagine she knows all the ins and outs. So I am led to believe that she's now going to tell Mark everything about Gemma and what exactly is Cold Harbor. Or will Lumen get to her first before she can? I really enjoyed this episode a lot. Now, it wasn't as impactful emotionally speaking as last week's episode, but again, changing the locations that we've never been in before, meeting new characters, and learning more about Cobell's past was definitely a welcome experience. Now, as per usual, Ben Stiller directed the hell out of this episode. I really liked the character work that he did on this episode, like crafting the emotions from a character like Cobell, who's mostly been positioned as a bad guy, but seeing the switch really felt earned to me in this episode. Speaking to the supporting characters, Sissy and Hampton, like I thought the performances felt lived in and very believable. The location, while depleted and broken, was crafted perfectly for the story and was also beautiful to look at the same time. So I would assume next week, episode 9, the penultimate episode, I would imagine Mark, now fully reintegrated, will take all the new knowledge and try to rescue Gemma, but the question is, will it be too late? So there you have it. Congratulations. You all have made it to the end of this week's breakdown. I cannot thank you all enough for the continued support, and I love seeing when you all are still here at the very end of this video. So do me a favor, put in the comments right now, #Harmony. So now to my favorite part of this video, which is hearing you all's commentary on the episode. If you're not aware, every Monday I make a Severance separate video in response to how you all reacted to the episode, and I love to read out your theories and kind of share my thoughts about them. So again, share your major talking points, your deeper meanings, your big theories, everything that you all took away from this episode. Let's talk about it in the comments below. If you all enjoyed this breakdown, do me a favor, hit that like button. Let's try to get this to over 2,000 likes. Also, consider hitting that share button. Share this video to anyone and everyone you know that loves talking about Severance just as much as we do. And again, thank you all for the continued support. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, stick around by subscribing to the channel. And also, if you want to take the support even further, consider joining the channel memberships, which can be found in the description of this video. Don't forget, you all are awesome. Stay safe, and remember,
after all, we must be cut to heal.